I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but here we go. If you're a responsible gun owner who legally owns what most of us would consider standard parts, say, a simple muzzle brake permanently attached to a pinned and welded barrel, you might unknowingly be stepping into felony territory. And no, this isn't some leftover policy from a past administration. This is current. This is happening right now, under the watch of today's leadership. What makes this even more alarming is that it's not some isolated incident. It fits right into a larger pattern we've seen develop where law-abiding folks like you and me suddenly find ourselves staring down felony charges because the ATF has decided to shift how they interpret existing gun laws. These sudden reinterpretations usually hit with zero public notice, no comment period, and absolutely no transparency. If you think that sounds blown out of proportion, just hang tight. I'm about to lay out proof that shows exactly how far unelected bureaucrats are willing to push, rewriting the rules and putting millions of everyday gun owners at legal risk. This isn't just about a technical rule change. It's about trust being stripped away, unchecked power being abused, and federal authorities weaponizing gray areas in the law against people who've played by the rules from day one. To really understand how deep this rabbit hole goes, you need to get a feel for how the ATF operates and just how much unchecked authority they wield without any need for congressional approval. The ATF enforces federal gun legislation, most of which goes back to the National Firearms Act of 1934 and the Gun Control Act of 1968. Those two laws define what a firearm is, what counts as a suppressor, and what modifications are considered legal. But here's where the problem starts. These definitions keep changing, and not by elected officials. These tweaks are coming from behind closed doors, courtesy of career bureaucrats inside the agency. One of the most powerful arms of the ATF is the Firearms Technology Industry Services Branch, or FTISB. Their job, on paper, is to examine firearms, attachments, and how specific components are configured. Sounds like technical work, right? But in reality, this group can single-handedly decide whether something is legal or not without Congress ever casting a vote. One especially influential player within the FTISB is a woman named Eve Eisenby. Most folks outside of the gun world probably haven't heard her name, but her decisions have had serious ripple effects. She's been at the center of multiple high-stakes rulings, including those around pistol braces, suppressor parts, and most recently, barrels that are pinned and welded. And despite how much influence she holds, there's shockingly little public info about her background or qualifications. What we do know is this: under her direction, the FTISB has been driving some of the most aggressive reinterpretations of gun law we've ever seen. For example, they're now suggesting that a barrel extended to legal length by using a pinned and welded muzzle device might not count as permanently attached if, hypothetically, someone could remove it with tools. Never mind that this exact practice has been standard across the firearms industry for decades and was explicitly approved by the ATF in an official ruling back in the year 2006. Now her team appears to be walking that back, and that could mean rifles built to meet the 16-inch barrel rule may be reclassified as short-barreled rifles under the National Firearms Act. If that happens, owners would be looking at mandatory registration, a $200 tax stamp, and all the red tape that comes with owning a regulated NFA item. That means folks who carefully followed every guideline to build a legal rifle could be retroactively turned into criminals just because someone inside the ATF decided to reinterpret the rules. This kind of legal flip-flopping doesn't just confuse people, it shatters the very idea that laws should be clear, consistent, and fairly enforced. When one unelected agency can redefine what's legal on a whim, every gun owner in America is left wondering whether they're one policy memo away from being charged with a felony. And if you think this is just theoretical, let me walk you through some real-world examples that show just how reckless these reinterpretations have become. These aren't hypotheticals. These are real cases involving real people. Take the case of a man named Charles Wright. He wound up in court because the ATF claimed that combining a pistol brace with a cheek rest effectively turned his firearm into a short-barreled rifle under the National Firearms Act. The only thing that saved him from a felony conviction was a jury that had the good sense to call the charge what it was nonsense and throw the case out. Now here's the part that ought to make every responsible gun owner furious. That case should have never made it to a courtroom in the first place. The fact that a stabilizing brace designed from the ground up to help folks shoot more safely and with more control was suddenly labeled as a defining trait of a regulated national firearms act weapon caught just about everyone off guard. No public notice, no heads up, just another classic move from the ATF, changing the rules after the game already started. And believe me, the craziness doesn't stop there. Lately, the ATF has been directing its attention toward things that don't even remotely resemble firearms. We're not talking about stricter enforcement. We're talking about full-blown absurdity. Would you believe there have been suggestions from the Firearms Technology Industry Services branch that ordinary household items like throw pillows, ceramic mugs, and even uncooked potatoes could be treated as suppressors if there's any theoretical way they might fit over the end of a barrel? I'm not joking. If you can even imagine attaching it to a muzzle, that's apparently enough to raise federal suspicion. This kind of backwards logic criminalizes regular life. It turns a typical American garage or kitchen drawer into a legal minefield. If simple tools or harmless objects lying around your home can be used against you, then where's the line? When everyday items become potential evidence, you've got to wonder what's next. And that brings us to one of the latest, most baffling developments: the crackdown on barrels that have been pinned and welded. For more than 20 years, this has been a widely accepted practice, used across the board by home builders and top-tier manufacturers alike. The idea is simple: attach a muzzle device, like a brake or flash hider, to a barrel that's shorter than 16 inches, and make that connection permanent. The ATF themselves gave this method the green light in a formal decision all the way back in 2006. A pinned and welded device on a 14.5-inch barrel was considered valid and compliant with the 16-inch minimum length required by federal law. Everyone understood the rule. Everyone followed it. But now, seemingly out of nowhere, that standard is being tossed out. Under the current administration, the ATF's latest interpretation suggests that if someone could remove that muzzle device, even with specialized tools, it might no longer qualify as a true permanent modification. In other words, if it's technically possible to detach it, then the barrel might not be legal anymore. This sudden reinterpretation throws countless legally assembled rifles into regulatory limbo. And let's be clear, these aren't obscure, one-off custom jobs. These are rifles built using widely accepted practices, trusted by seasoned shooters, and made by respected manufacturers that have been playing by the rules for decades. There was no congressional debate, no public forum, no warning at all, just internal memos and quiet policy shifts, driven by an agency with no real oversight. The stakes here are huge. If you're a weekend range goer, a competition shooter, a hobby builder, or just someone who wants to make sure you're staying on the right side of the law, you are now left wondering whether your perfectly legal rifle from last year might become illegal tomorrow. That's not how lawmaking is supposed to work in a constitutional republic. Now that we've gone through some examples, let's dive deeper into what these changes really mean, both from a legal and mechanical standpoint. Because this isn't just some minor tweak in enforcement policy, it's a total reimagining of what defines legality in the gun world. Let's break down the pinned and welded process one more time. When someone affixes a muzzle brake or flash hider to a barrel shorter than 16 inches, they do it to meet the legal minimum barrel length under federal law. The ATF had always said until recently that as long as the attachment couldn't be removed without physically destroying the barrel, it counted as permanent. That rule became gospel. Gunsmiths designed around it. Major firearms companies built entire product lines based on it. And law-abiding American shooters relied on it. But now, the ATF is trying to redefine what permanent even means. According to their latest line of thinking, if there's any way to remove the part, even if it requires advanced tools, serious effort, or extreme methods, it may no longer meet the standard. That's not sound engineering. And it sure as hell isn't sound legal reasoning. It's like saying a bank vault isn't secure because someone could eventually crack it with enough time and the right gear. What's truly dangerous here is the precedent. This turns compliance into a guessing game. If legality hinges on hypothetical scenarios instead of actual configurations, then every gun owner in the country is at risk. It creates a culture of paranoia where builders overcompensate, second-guess every setup, and fear that a future reinterpretation might turn their collection into contraband. That's not sound policy. It's outright abuse of authority. The purpose of the law is to bring clarity and structure, not confusion and uncertainty. When citizens carefully follow written rules and build their firearms within well-established legal frameworks, they should not have to live in fear that a bureaucratic interpretation tomorrow might turn them into criminals overnight. But that's the exact reality we're facing. Law-abiding gun owners are now being placed in legal jeopardy by rule changes crafted behind closed doors, not by Congress, not by representatives we elected, but by unelected federal employees most Americans couldn't even name. Individuals like Eve Eisenby, embedded deep inside the ATF's infrastructure, are quietly making decisions with sweeping national impact. These figures are not selected by voters. They are not presidential appointees, and they do not answer to the Senate. Yet their influence has the power to destroy careers, bankrupt companies, and erode the freedoms of everyday Americans. Here's the hard truth. The ATF is no longer merely enforcing existing laws. It is actively reshaping them discreetly, repeatedly, and without the involvement of the democratic process. That's not law enforcement, that's lawmaking. And when agencies that are unelected begin wielding legislative power, the very pillars of American liberty begin to weaken. What concerns me most isn't just the redefinitions or bizarre rulings. It's the broader atmosphere this creates, one of anxiety and distrust among responsible gun owners across the country. When a federal agency can move the goalposts at will, without transparency or due process, it leaves millions of law-abiding citizens wondering where they stand in relation to the law. This isn't just a technical detail buried in the weeds of federal regulation. It's a growing threat to civil liberty. That creeping sense of uncertainty carries a chilling effect. When Americans no longer know if firearm builds will be legal next month, it chills not just expression, but participation in constitutionally protected rights. When the line between a paperwork oversight and a felony becomes blurred, every American gun owner or not should be concerned. For decades, the understanding was simple: purchase components legally, build according to ATF guidance, and stay compliant with federal law. That foundation gave gun owners confidence. But now, even time-tested practices like pinning and welding a muzzle device to meet legal length requirements are being cast into doubt. This isn't just speculation. It's already happening. People who did everything right, who studied the rules, asked the right questions, and followed official guidance, are now unsure if their legally configured rifles could trigger federal charges. And here's the real problem. Not everyone can afford an attorney or spend weeks unraveling legal memos. Most folks don't have the time or money to fight back. So instead, they just stop. They stop customizing. They avoid certain builds. Not because they're in the wrong, but because they're afraid of waking up to find they've been turned into a criminal without ever breaking a single law. That's not what justice is supposed to look like, and it sure doesn't feel like freedom. Worse still, it erodes faith in the very institutions meant to serve the American people. The role of agencies like the ATF is to implement and enforce laws passed by Congress, not to invent new legal standards behind closed doors. When unelected administrators are empowered to issue binding directives with the force of law and criminal consequences, without public debate or congressional approval, we no longer have a representative system. We have bureaucracy run amok. What we're witnessing isn't just government overreach. It's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of individuals we did not choose, who do not answer to us, and who can issue life-altering decisions without ever having to justify them publicly. That should alarm anyone who believes in limited government and constitutional checks and balances. This is precisely why there is a growing call, not for minor adjustments, but for serious reform and oversight. Because if a faceless agency can criminalize everyday behavior with a policy memo, something is deeply broken in the system. And this conversation, while focused on firearms, is really about something bigger, safeguarding the core principles this country was founded on: due process, equal protection, a government that answers to the people, not the other way around. But let's not leave it there. This doesn't have to end in frustration. There are steps we can take. First, we need to support the groups that are on the front lines of this fight. Organizations like Gun Owners of America have used legal tools like the Freedom of Information Act to expose hidden ATF memos and alert the public before irreversible damage is done. Are they perfect? No organization is. But they're doing the legwork that most Americans never get a chance to see, and it's making a difference. Second, we must demand better from our elected officials. It's not enough for them to wave a flag and talk about gun rights every election season. We need real leadership representatives, willing to challenge federal agencies, hold hearings, and impose oversight that actually matters. Congressional review must be more than a rubber stamp. It should serve as a hard stop against executive overreach. Third, we have to stay engaged and informed. Talk about this with friends. Share it with fellow shooters and community leaders. The more people who understand what's happening, the less room there is for bureaucratic maneuvering. This isn't just about Second Amendment rights. It's about protecting the American principle that no government entity should be allowed to rewrite the law in the shadows. And finally, I want to speak directly to you, whether you're reading this or watching it. Don't dismiss these warnings. The slow erosion of liberty never makes a loud entrance. It starts with quiet edits, with minor reclassifications, with terms that shift subtly over time. But those changes pile up. Eventually, they form the groundwork for something much more dangerous. If you value your freedoms, if you believe in the Constitution and the balance of power, you cannot afford to ignore what's happening. This is the time to get involved, to speak up, and to push back before more ground is lost. Because let's be honest, this isn't stopping on its own. The ATF has already shown it is willing to overturn decades of precedent and reinterpret foundational definitions without so much as a press release. If that doesn't sound the alarm, I don't know what will. That's my message for today. I hope it gave you something to think about, and maybe even sparked a deeper conversation. If it did, keep digging, keep sharing, and support the people working to hold the line. Thanks for being here. Stay aware, stay engaged, and most of all, stay free.